Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, and the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep creating this content. Got a really important show lined up for you today. Dr. Annie Andrews is here, and that's a name you're going to hear much more often in the coming months and probably next year and a half. She just announced her candidacy for U.S. Senate in the state of South Carolina to take on Trump sycophant Lindsey Graham. Dr. Andrews has a brilliant history in serving the community as a physician. She ran against Nancy Mace, which is one of the worst people in Congress, it turns out. Ran against Nancy Mace a couple years ago and did extremely well. Got well into the 40s in terms of percentile. Didn't win, but made it a very close race. And I think she has the momentum, the expertise, the compassion, and the conviction to win this against Lindsey Graham. I will say I'm extremely impressed by her already, given that she's not taking any corporate PAC money, which is why I'm hoping I'm going to donate to her, and I'm hoping you guys donate to her as well, because at the end of the day, we really need to get behind the folks who are leading with this courageous element of not taking corporate PAC money. So much of politics is just drowning in corporate corruption and drowning in politicians who say one thing but then take corporate PAC money and just screw us over. And Dr. Andrews is telling us that she is not taking any corporate PAC money, and we should believe her because she didn't take it last time. She's not going to take it this time. All that to say, I'm excited to have her on the show in a few minutes to talk about her campaign and why she's going to win and how we can help her. Before we dive in, I want to talk about two things. One, we're going to talk about after Dr. Andrews, and that is how Donald Trump keeps losing in court. And I bring that up because it matters. It's important, especially at a time when just so much crap is happening. You need to take your victories. And I want to take a moment to talk about the major victories we've had in court and continue to have, because again, we need to recognize not only that we are having wins, but recognize how we are having those wins, because we need to duplicate that over and over again. And I've been begging the Democratic establishment to look at this model of filing these lawsuits. And I will give credit to the state attorney generals who are doing a great job, but the party is just like, what the hell? File these lawsuits. Let's get it going. So we'll talk about those. But first, I want to talk about this so-called big, beautiful bill, this in reality, big billionaire bailout that Donald Trump is passing through the House. I want you to take a moment to think back to December 4th, 2024. That day, a man named Luigi Mangione allegedly killed the United Health CEO. Now, fast forward to now. You're probably listening to this end of May, early June. I want you to realize that in that time, how many people do you think have died due to not having access to basic health care? It's been about 32,000 people who have died because health insurance corporations decided our profits are more important than the people that we're supposed to be serving. And the reason why that matters is because if we agree, and I think we do, that killing people on the street is wrong, not a controversial position to take, do not kill people on the street, why are we suddenly okay with politicians and billion-dollar insurance corporations deciding we're going to change a policy knowing full well it's going to kill people? We're not going to change the policy because it's better for healthcare. We're not going to change the policy because it's better for the overall experience of decreasing suffering. No, we're going to change the policy because it'll make us more money, and that's all we care about. And that's fundamentally the problem here. And when you have things like this big, beautiful bill, so-called big, beautiful bill, that MAGA Republicans are trying to pass, we are talking absolute devastation. It's going to throw at least 15 million people off of healthcare. At least 15 million. People will die. And that's what you need to understand. People will die. It's the reason why I don't call them health insurance corporations. I call them health exploitation corporations. And because they limit their own liability, I call them health exploitation limited liability corporations, or hell corporations, because that's what they put you through. They put you through hell. And that number I cited, look, according to The Lancet, America's for-profit health system run by these health corporations is responsible for nearly 68,000 preventable deaths every single year. So since Luigi Mangione allegedly killed the United Health CEO, there have been over 32,000 preventable deaths because health insurance corporations decided that profit is more important than people. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports that the Department of Justice has opened a criminal fraud investigation into United Health's Medicare practices. And this is not an isolated incident. Last year, a 5-year investigation into United Health's practices by the FTC found that the group's pharmacy benefits manager, along with his two main peers, Express Scripts and CVS Caremark, pocketed an extra $7.3 billion over the cost thanks to price gouging. 7.3 billion they price gouged. They can't afford to pay for your spouse's $100,000 surgery, but they can afford to pocket an extra 7.3 billion in price gouging. These are the health corporations that MAGA Republicans are bending the knee to while tens of millions of Americans suffer. And sadly, it's not just MAGA Republicans. I'm going to give you an example of this. You know, I've run for Congress twice. I ran once against a Republican and once against a Democrat. I am going to present these scenarios, and I want you to tell me if this was the Republican who held this position or the Democrat who held this position. Okay, first position. Opposed guaranteed universal health care and took tons of money from health corporations, including from United Health. Was that the Republican or the Democrat? Hold that thought. Second position, and there's only four I'm going to go into. Second one, voted repeatedly to repeal the Affordable Care Act, including repealing the protection on people with pre-existing conditions and repealing the ban on charging women more than men for their health care. Was it the Republican that I ran against that held that position or the Democrat? Again, hold that thought. Third position, voted to gut the Americans with Disabilities Act to deny people with disabilities the right to sue when they face discrimination. Yeah, because as we know, if there's one group in this country that has too much power, it's disabled people, and so we need to knock them down, and which is why this person I ran against decided to gut the ADA to ensure that people with disabilities could not sue when they face discrimination. Fourth one, funded by Exxon and Big Oil, which has enabled climate disaster, believes in offshore drilling, and believes in fracking. Now, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, obviously these are four positions held by the Republican Party. And you would be partially correct. Because the point I'm trying to make is that it's not just Republicans, it's also some Democrats. The Republican ran against a guy named Rob Whitman has all four of these positions. He's well funded by health corporations, voted to repeal the ACA, including removing the protection of people with pre-existing conditions, voted to gut the Americans with Disabilities Act, funded by Big Oil. Problem is that my second opponent I ran against, a guy named Bill Foster, a Democrat, who fancies himself a scientist, Democrat Bill Foster also opposes universal health care and is funded by health corporations. He also wants to repeal the ACA, voted 3 times to repeal the ACA, including gutting the protection on people with pre-existing conditions. He also wants to gut the ADA and deny people with disabilities the right to sue when they face discrimination. He also is funded by Big Oil and is anti-Green New Deal, pro-fracking, pro-offshore drilling. This is a Democrat. And so the hypocrisy and cowardice of people like him is why Congress is just full of people that Americans are sick of. It's why so many people are just revolted at this. I mean, this guy is like 70 years old as well. So we talk about people who are well into their senior citizenship years making these terrible decisions that are going to impact all of us for a generation. And so this is why it's important, conservative, progressive, independent, centrist, that I hope you stand against this big billionaire bailout that Donald Trump is trying to push because it's going to hurt all of us massively. And this is why it's important to get away from the vote blue no matter who and actually vote for the people running for office who are not taking corporate money. It's important. It matters. That's how we strengthen healthcare access. That's how we strengthen working families. That's how we strengthen our economy by ensuring that the people we elect to office are actually reflective of the working people that they're running to serve. And that's, by the way, why I'm all in for Dr. Annie Andrews, who's going to come on in just a minute, an amazing physician, an amazing community servant, a mom, someone who has served the community for years in the trenches in healthcare access, women's rights, economic justice. I mean, she kind of has the full resume. I'm very impressed by her. And she's going to come on after this break and talk about her campaign, why she's running, and how you can be involved. But when I talk about ensuring or putting our resources behind the right candidates, Dr. Andrews is the kind of person that I am talking about. Everything I've seen from her so far is extraordinarily impressive, and I can't wait to introduce her to you. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back with Dr. Annie Andrews after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited to bring on our guest today. Dr. Annie Andrews is a pediatrician, a mom, and makes very clear she's not a politician. She spent her entire career serving South Carolina families, and she's running for U.S. Senate now against Lindsey Graham, I would say for the people. And I think what really excites me about her is her take on healthcare, the fact that she won't take a dime of corporate PAC money, and the fact that she has lived by example. She's not somebody who just showed up yesterday. She's lived by example as someone who's been fighting for working families in South Carolina. Dr. Andrews, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that my listeners love to hear is what is your superhero origin story? What was the point where you said, the hell with this, I can't just stand on the sidelines anymore. I need to be more engaged and involved. What does that story look like for you?
Yeah, I love to tell this story. It's several points in my life that got me off the sidelines to the point that now I'm a candidate for U.S. Senate, something I never thought I would do. It really starts in 2016. My youngest of three children was born 6 days before Donald Trump was elected.
Oh,
So the night of the 2016 election, I was a weary-eyed mom of a newborn baby girl. And as I watched those election returns come in and looked at my beautiful baby girl's face, I knew that the world wasn't what I thought it was, and that I was going to have to find a way to fight for the world that I know that my children and all 73 million children in this world deserve. So it's not like I got off the sidelines the next day. Again, I had a newborn baby girl. I'm not that much of a superhero. But then you fast forward to 2018. On February 14th, 2018 was the day of the tragic school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And that day, I was the mom of a kindergartner, and it was the first school shooting that I experienced as a parent of a school-age child. And it hit me different.
hmm.
And I think it's also important to say that's only a sentence that a parent in America has to say. And I knew in that moment after that tragic shooting that I had to do something. So I actually joined Moms Demand Action, our nation's largest gun violence prevention organization. And through that work, learned the power of my voice as a pediatrician and a concerned mom, a concerned community member. I learned how to effectively advocate for the things I care about. I learned how to talk to my South Carolina state legislators about the things that I care about. And everything just snowballed from there to the point that in 2022, I decided to run for Congress against the uniquely horrific Nancy Mace.
Yeah.
And as you said, I haven't slowed down since. I continue to find every possible way to fight for the things that I know every child in this country deserves, that every family in this country deserves. And that ultimately led to me making the announcement this week that I'm now running for U.S. Senate against Lindsey Graham.
And I'm looking at the results of that race, and you did extremely well. You got well into the 40s against someone who is, personally backed by Donald Trump and has just absorbed, exorbitant amounts of money and very little moral compass on the rules of the game. There are no rules when it comes to her. So kudos to you. It's extremely impressive to get well into the 40s against someone like her. What's the strategy here? Because, Lindsey Graham's he's basically a fixture in the Senate. He's been there for a million years. He's out of touch beyond, how bad words can explain. But he's also got an absurd amounts of money, and because he's such a sycophant for Trump, he's going to get all the support and the endorsements there as well. So, what is the strategy in this race?
Yeah, so I know from being on the phones that Republicans and Democrats in South Carolina and across the country are are equally fed up with the corrupt career politicians in Washington, D.C. Lindsey Graham has been in the Senate for 22 years, which is exactly half of my lifetime.
Wow.
And over that period of time, he has changed his position on essentially every issue, because to anyone paying attention, it is clear that he stands for nothing and believes in nothing other than what will get him reelected or allow him to stay in Trump's good graces.
Yeah.
So his approval rating is terrible. He's 10 points below Donald Trump in South Carolina right now. So
Wow.
he is uniquely vulnerable in this 2026 election. And you couple that with the fact that, voters in South Carolina are feeling the direct negative impacts of the chaotic Trump administration in ways they weren't feeling in 2020, in ways they weren't feeling in 2018. I live in South Carolina. The chaotic implementation of these tariff policies are directly impacting the ports here in the Low Country, our state's auto industry. They're impacting our small business owners and our farmers. So voters in South Carolina have given Lindsey Graham 22 years to make their lives better, and he hasn't. And in fact, many, many things in the state have gotten worse. And so I think folks are ready for a change. I think 2026 is going to be an incredibly unique election cycle. I think there's going to be huge backlash to what the Trump administration is up to. And I think voters understand that Lindsey Graham is standing by and enabling every single thing that Donald Trump has done since he was inaugurated.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Dr. Annie Andrews, who's running for U.S. Senate in South Carolina, running, of course, as a Democrat to unseat Lindsey Graham. And, I was a young law student in 2009, 2010. And I remember writing a piece about this, the growing anti-Sharia movement and the growing anti-immigrant movement in the country. And I actually cited Lindsey Graham in a law review article as an example of a Republican who is standing on the right side of history, standing for justice and compassion and humanity. And then to your point, Dr. Andrews, he's completely flipped. You would look at who he was 15 years ago to now, and you see two entirely different people. And I think that's fundamentally the problem, that we don't have elected leaders who are standing by values and principles and running on values and principles. We have people who are trying to appease the Orange Menace in the White House and trying to get them to, give money and endorsements. I know one issue that you've been adamant on that's very near and dear to my heart is healthcare. My wife and I have three amazing kids. Our youngest, our daughter, has a chronic health condition that, if not treated, is fatal. And we spent several years fighting with our insurance company for the basic care that she needed to live. Everything from, a peer-to-peer, our physician speaking to them. We were rejected more than 13 times before we finally, through a miracle, were able to get the support that we needed. What is your vision for healthcare, especially right now as the Trump regime, with Lindsey Graham's support, is looking to cut $500 billion from Medicare, $800 billion from Medicaid, even SNAP and TANF? What is your vision? What does a Senator Andrews do in this situation to push back against this atrocity?
Thank you for sharing your family struggles with America's healthcare system. So many people don't understand what it's like to be on the inside of our healthcare system. I decided to be a doctor when I was 4 years old because I was fascinated by science and anatomy, and I never wavered from that path, but I didn't have a true understanding of the dysfunction of America's healthcare system until I started practicing as a physician in the healthcare system. And what you just described is so common. As a provider, as a physician, over the years I've been practicing, less and less of my time is spent in direct patient contact, and more of my time is spent on the phone with insurance companies, trying to figure out what prescription is approved this month, trying to document so that we can bill for the services that were provided. Because frankly, we have a profit-motivated healthcare system in this country, and we need a patient-centered healthcare system in this country. And I believe there has never been a more important time for physicians like myself to step up and run for office at the highest levels, because we are seeing a coordinated attack on America's healthcare system with the appointment of RFK Jr., a renowned conspiracy theorist and grifter, to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. We have Dr. Oz over at CMS, and now potentially Dr. Casey Means as Surgeon General. I mean, it's a it's a joke. It's an insult to everyone who has dedicated their career to practicing medicine. It's an insult to everyone in America who seeks healthcare. They're also attacking our nation's research institutions, NIH funding. Now they're talking about not allowing NIH scientists to publish in our nation's premier medical journals. I worry so deeply about the decades it's going to take us to recover from this coordinated attack on our healthcare infrastructure, our public health infrastructure. And that is why I feel so compelled to run in this race and try to defeat Lindsey Graham and gain back control of the Senate and get this country on the right track.
And I'll say it for those listening, this is the kind of person you want to donate to, a person who's not taking the corporate PAC money, a person who will be accountable to working people. And that's where we should be investing our money and resources. I know as a candidate, you have to ask that constantly, so I'll throw that in for you right now. We'll ask you for your website in a second. If you're just tuning in, speaking to Dr. Andrews running for U.S. Senate. Speaking of healthcare, let's talk about reproductive justice and the fact that South Carolina is one of the most restrictive states in the country at a 6-week ban before most women even know that they're expecting. What is the message to Carolinians on reproductive justice? Because the polling tells us that even among conservatives, abortion access is actually, above 50%, well above 50%. How do we get the message across, or how do you plan to get the message across that this is not about what Republicans have made it out to be, but this is actually about basic healthcare access?
That's right. Republicans know that their position on reproductive healthcare access is deeply unpopular. It's unpopular across the country. It's unpopular in South Carolina. Will they back down? No, not unless they're pushed. Lindsey Graham supports a national ban on abortion without exceptions for rape or incest. And honestly, if I was going to list all the people in the
Say that
world,
again. Say that again. I didn't realize this. He supports a ban without exceptions for rape and incest.
yes, I mean, he's basically held every position on this issue other than the
Yeah.
position that allows women to access. I don't know what the latest thing he said on the
Yeah,
issue
it could
is.
change, but that's the fact that he was ever there in the first place is mortifying.
Exactly, exactly. And if I was going to think of all the people whose opinions I want on what I should do with my own body, Lindsey Graham is pretty close to the bottom of that
Absolutely.
list. I know as a physician that access to reproductive health care is a right for women, and this is an issue that should stay between women and their physicians. Politicians should have nothing to do with the health care provided to women across this country. And I know I'm going to hear from all kinds of folks on the right about what my position on late-term abortions is. And first, it's important to understand that is not a scientific or medical term at all. And when they're saying that, they're talking about generally abortions that occur after the 20-week ultrasound. And I think it's important for folks to understand so that they can go out and push back against this pervasive talking point that when women seek abortions after the 20 weeks, this, first of all, is a tiny proportion of the abortions that happen in this country. And second of all, these are by definition tragic, devastating situations. Often these women have named the baby, they have built the crib, decorated the nursery. They go to the doctor excited to find out the baby's gender, and they find out the baby has a fetal anomaly that will not be sustainable outside of the womb. And then they have to make the unthinkable choice to carry the pregnancy to term, knowing that baby will not survive, or to seek an elective abortion. The government should have nothing to say about those women in those terrifying, horrific, heartbreaking situations. And when men like Lindsey Graham think that their opinion on that issue matters, I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, well said. And that's an extraordinarily painful reality that, look, every one of us knows someone who's gone through that in some capacity or another. And to me, I remind folks, it's really fundamentally a question of, do you trust women to know what's best for their bodies, or do you trust Lindsey Graham to know what's best for a woman's body? I mean, I think anyway, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. If you really think Lindsey Graham is better suited to decide what a woman's healthcare should be as opposed to the woman, there's a deeper issue you need to figure out. But it doesn't make any sense. We need to fundamentally just trust women. That's what it comes down to. I appreciate your medical analysis and this really thoughtful analysis you've given, Dr. Andrews. And I would tell folks it goes even simpler than that. Everything you said is exactly right. And I would tell folks that if you disagree with that for whatever reason, the fundamental thing to me is just trust women. It's not that complicated. Just trust women, and life will be a lot better as a result of it. South Carolina is one of the most poverty-stricken states in the country. Ranks 11th in terms of highest U.S. Poverty, which means that there's about 39 states that are less poor than South Carolina. Um, One of the driving messages we were told of why Donald Trump won is because of an economic message, and we're already seeing that collapse spectacularly with this, circus around tariffs, with the courts now blocking the tariffs, Target losing, I don't know, $600 million last quarter, and the list just goes on and on. What's the economic message to voters on why a Senator Andrews is going to be far better than Lindsey Graham?
Yeah, so Lindsey Graham's had 22 years to help South Carolina climb up some of these ladders to decrease the number of children who are living in poverty, to decrease our maternal mortality rate, to increase the quality of our public schools, to bring broadband across the state. And I don't think it would be very easy to find a voter in South Carolina who could articulate a way in which Lindsey Graham has made their lives better. I've spent 15 years at the Children's Hospital here in the Low Country taking care of families who don't know where their next meal is coming from, don't know if they can afford their child's prescription drugs. And these families need help, and Lindsey Graham has done nothing to help them. It's my job as a doctor to sit down with patients, sometimes on their worst days of their lives when their child has been admitted to the hospital, to sit down with them, to listen to their concerns, to build trust with them, to together come up with solutions to their problems. And that's what I'll do in the Senate. But that's what drove me to get involved in politics in the first place, because I can do that individual patient to patient to patient. But I started to understand the systemic barriers that are the result of the corruption in Washington, D.C. that harm our kids and families long before they ever show up in the hospital. And it's these rates of systemic poverty. So many children are growing up in this state. We could do so much better for the children and families in South Carolina. We just need to give a new leader a chance. And, a couple important points. Lindsey Graham cannot wait to vote yes on what they call the big, beautiful bill, which will kick 1.1 million South Carolinians off of Medicaid. And also, Lindsey Graham does not support the expanded and permanent child tax credit, which is the most successful legislative approach to lifting American children out of poverty. When we had it during COVID, millions of children were lifted out of poverty. Lindsey Graham's a no on that because he actually doesn't care at all about what South Carolinians need or want. He said so much into a microphone recently. He doesn't need to talk to us down here in South Carolina because he's going to do whatever Donald Trump tells him to do.
And to put in perspective for our listeners, kicking 1.1 million folks off healthcare, South Carolina's entire population is barely 5 million. You're talking more than 20% of people, and the ripple effect of that, Dr. Andrews, I have to imagine is going to be devastating. I mean, hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. I can't understand why anyone in their right mind would want to do that. I feel like they have some bad intel or some kind of, damning information on Lindsey Graham that he's trying to avoid being released to the public. That's the only thing my conspiracy mind can come up with. But the human carnage that will result of passing something like that is going to be absolutely devastating. Um, I want to close on a bit of a lighter note because we've been talking about some heavy things. I'm going to ask you to share how folks can get involved with your campaign. But I also want you to share what's the last good book you read, the last good movie you saw, and where you want to take a moment to try to travel in this next year.
Okay, that's great. So first, people can follow along the campaign at drannieandrews.com. Please sign up to get notifications from us. We want you to join this movement to defeat Lindsey Graham. You can also follow me on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at Annie Andrews MD. It should be easy to find me, so please follow along, and I would really appreciate folks' support. I am very excited to travel all across the state. I live here in the Low Country, raising my children about 2 miles from the beach. It's been an incredible place to raise my family. Can't wait to get up to the Midlands, take my kids back to the Columbia Zoo. Also can't wait to get up to the lakes and foothills of the mountains in the upstate of South Carolina. You asked me about a book. So Lee McGowan, Politics Girl, wrote a really incredible
Yeah,
book.
she's
Of
great.
course, the title of it is going to escape me, but it's about returning to common sense.
Yeah.
And it's exactly why I got involved in politics. I didn't grow up like as a hardcore Democrat, but I align with the Democratic Party because they're the ones who fight for common sense. They're the ones who fight for our kids. And so her book is an amazing sort of opportunity to reset the way we talk about politics in America. And I think it's fantastic. And then you just asked me about a movie, and
Last
goodness, I'm
movie.
watching all kids' movies with my
Yeah.
kids. Actually, we just rewatched The Sound of Music and with all three of my kids, and we watched it over the series of 2 nights, and they loved it. And I loved watching them experience that movie.
We're around the same age. I'm just super enjoying watching the 90s and 80s movies with my kids, that rewatching all those. It's the nostalgia, and then seeing them excited about it. It's a lot of fun too.
It really, really is.
Dr. Annie Andrews running for U.S. Senate in the state of South Carolina. You said our website is annieandrews.com.
DrAnnieAndrews.com.
DrAnnieAndrews.com. Everyone go there, donate even $1, and make it a recurring dollar as well. Donate $5, make it recurring. Especially when we have candidates like Dr. Andrews who are not taking corporate PAC money. We need to step up and show the world that this is a viable way to win this seat. And I believe Dr. Annie Andrews can win. Dr. Andrews, thank you for being with us. Thank you for running. We hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Dr. Annie Andrews running for U.S. Senate in South Carolina. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep our advocacy going. That was Dr. Annie Andrews, and I think you can see now why I'm so impressed by her. Thoughtful, compassionate, smart, hardworking, has the right values in this entire race, and somebody that we need to elect and get into Congress, into the U.S. Senate as quickly as humanly possible. You can check out her website at DrAnnieAndrews.com. And like I said, throw a few bucks at her. She's 100% people funded, and these are the kinds of leaders that we need in the halls of Congress, in the halls of power, to ensure that we're protecting our democracy, to ensure that we're getting folks what they need to be successful. I want to close out the show by talking about some of the wins that we've been experiencing. I know it's easy to fall into despair and think that nothing is working to stop Trump and his fascism. But the good news is that while we're not making as much progress as I would like, we are making meaningful progress. And I think it's important that we celebrate those wins because they also are instructive on how we can continue to have a strong opposition against the fascism that we're seeing. And right now, those wins are happening most often in court. In recent weeks, Trump has faced a series of major legal setbacks. And like I said, they underscore that despite his attacks on the judiciary, our judicial system is pulling through on some really critical matters. It speaks to the power of collective activism, of civic activism, of a social push for accountability, especially as we're protecting our most basic rights, such as free speech and due process, and Trump is attacking them relentlessly. So let's recognize that, yes, we are in a tough spot. And yes, Trump probably will increase his fascism, but there are wins that we need to talk about. Let's start with the Department of Education, because Trump has made clear that he wants to dismantle the Department of Education entirely. He very famously said the first time he ran for office that he loves the poorly educated. And there's a reason why. Studies show that lower educated individuals are more likely to buy into conspiracy theories, more likely to adhere to strongman authoritarian regimes, and are more likely to just follow kind of the cult mindset. Trump knows this, and that's why he, while being an elitist himself, tries to condemn people who went to Harvard. That's why he's attacking Harvard right now. We'll talk about that in a second. But the fact remains that he has prioritized dismantling the Department of Education, which he tried to do via executive order, because he knows that an educated populace is a populace that will not vote for him. He knows that people informed about their rights are people who will not vote for him. And so he's doing his best to dismantle the Department of Education and push conspiracy theories. The state of Oklahoma is now teaching that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Obviously nonsense, but this is the goal he has, is to push the Overton window. Now, last week, fortunately, a federal judge blocked his vision of an ignorant society and forbade him from dismantling the Department of Education. U.S. District Judge Myung Joan, Judge Myung Joan, I think that's how you pronounce it, said, quote, the record abundantly reveals that defendants' true intention is to effectively dismantle the department without an authorizing statute. The massive reduction in staff has made it effectively impossible for the department to carry out its statutorily mandated functions, end quote. Fantastic. Brilliant. Now, the fight's not over. Trump's likely going to appeal this to the Supreme Court, but a win is a win, and it speaks, again, to the power of collective activism against the Trump regime. Number two, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This case, in a unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland resident wrongfully deported under the Alien Enemies Act. The court emphasized the necessity of due process, stating that the administration's actions lacked any legal justification. I mean, imagine appointing, a third of the Supreme Court, making them hyper right wing, and then having them still vote 9-0 against you. Now, unfortunately, the Trump regime has refused to actually act on this order, which speaks again to the fact that the man does not actually care about law and order. He only cares about absolute power, and we should take him seriously on that as well. You've probably heard the names Mohsen Madawi and Rumeysa Ozturk. If you haven't, these are two very important names, and they represent two very important wins. Federal courts ordered the release of Columbia University student Mohsen Madawi and Tufts University doctoral candidate Rumeysa Ozturk. Both were detained for flat out peaceful and entirely legal and free speech protected political expressions. Mohsen was arrested at his citizenship interview, which is beyond cruel and fascist. And Rumeysa was arrested while walking to class because of an op-ed she wrote months prior, criticizing Tufts University for not condemning the onslaught and the genocide in Palestine. I mean, mind-boggling. You can vehemently disagree with those and still respect the fact that this is free speech and you're allowed to have a difference of opinion in this country. That's literally why the First Amendment exists. Both federal judges found that their detentions violated constitutional rights, that they violated free speech principles, and that those principles must be protected. The courts also rejected Marco Rubio's claim that their public criticism of U.S. foreign policy somehow harmed the nation's national security interests. Let me tell you something. If your national security plan is harmed by an op-ed by a student, but not harmed by your Secretary of Defense leaking private war information to random journalists, then it's not national security you care about. It's the fact that you have a massive ego and you care about being exposed as a moron. That's what's happening here. It's mind-boggling that they even tried to call this to be a national security issue. Speaking of, number four, fourth major case that the Trump regime lost is the Alien Enemies Act misapplication. The Supreme Court blocked Donald Trump's administration from their attempt to use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. And they've been using this to expedite deportations of citizens, of immigrants, of undocumented immigrants. In particular, it was to expedite deportations of Venezuelan immigrants. And the Supreme Court said that this circumvents due process of law. And you guys need to understand, due process is what separates us from a fascist regime. Due process says that if the government wants to arrest you and take away your rights and deprive you of your ability to be free and walk around wherever you want to go, then the government has to prove that you violated a law. And they can't just give you an accusation and say, hey, Joe, you violated a law, you're going to prison. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you broke the law knowingly and that you have to face consequences as a result of that. When Trump tried to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, what he was saying is that we are at war, there is an invasion happening, and therefore I don't need to do due process because we are at war. And the court said that, no, this is nonsense. Even during times of national concern, constitutional protections cannot be disregarded. And you guys, let's call it the hypocrisy here, right? There's like a major hypocrisy that most in media are not discussing. Trump wants us to believe, on one hand, that we are experiencing an invasion and there's immigrants everywhere and they're invading and pouring in across the borders. And that's why he needs to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, while simultaneously boasting how, as president, he's made our borders the most secure they've ever been. No one is getting through. If Joe Biden had done this, we wouldn't be in this mess. And now we have secure borders. Apparently, we have Schrodinger's border, one that is absolutely secure and one that is absolutely experiencing an invasion every second. And this is what really upsets me about Democrats. Joe Biden deported more people than did Donald Trump. I'm going to say that again. Joe Biden deported more people than did Donald Trump, and Joe Biden restricted immigration more than has Donald Trump. Fewer people cross the border at the end of Biden's term than at Trump's term. But Democrats are so bad on immigration and so bad on messaging about this that they have the American people convinced that Biden had, quote, open borders and Trump has, quote, shut down borders. And by the way, both parties are terrible about this. They are horrible on immigration. And that's why we're in this mess right now. If Democrats stood on their principles and said, no, we're going to stand by the Constitution, by due process of law, and immigrants, undocumented immigrants, still get due process of law, and we're going to solve this problem the right way, as opposed to just demonizing light of immigrants, we wouldn't be in this mess. But anyway, long and short of it, the Supreme Court rejected Trump's application of the Alien Enemies Act and says, nope, you cannot use that. You need to give people due process of law. A huge win for our democracy and for our republic. Let's shift to Maine. Maine's Title IX dispute. So you might recall this video from a few months ago where the Maine governor was at the White House at a governor's meeting, and Trump called her out for saying that she's for the state's policies on transgender athletes. And he famously berated Maine's governor for refusing to comply with his discriminatory orders against trans students. And the Maine governor said, no, we don't discriminate against trans students in our state. And Trump said, well, in that case, I'm going to freeze all USDA funds to Maine until you comply with his federal bigoted policy against trans students. And the Maine governor said, I will see you in court. And Trump said, yeah, I will see you in court. Well, the Maine governor saw Trump in court, and a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to unfreeze the funds that he had frozen from the USDA to Maine. And again, I want to point out this example of here's a governor who stood by principles and conviction as opposed to trying to appease these ridiculous culture wars that dehumanize a tiny minority of the country. You know, there are Democrats like Newsom and a few others who've kind of gone headfirst into, yeah, let's throw trans people under the bus. And we see the result of that. And here you have the Maine governor sticking to her principles and her values and saying, no, we're actually not going to sacrifice a minority of our population to make myself feel better. We're going to stand united for the sake of humanity and justice and not dehumanize anyone. And eureka, lo and behold, it actually worked. And the federal judge ordered Trump to unfreeze it. He had to unfreeze it, and the Maine governor got what they wanted. Trans people get to exist without discrimination, at least not in this case, no discrimination in this case. And we build a society that's more compassionate and more thoughtful. Not a complicated idea, but unfortunately, it's not here enough. Maine's governor is a great example of that, and it led to a major win in court. This next case is particularly important to me as a lawyer. A federal judge struck down an executive order targeting the law firm Perkins Coie, ruling it unconstitutional. The court determined that the order was a retaliatory act against the firm for its political affiliations, violating First Amendment protections. Perkins Coie, if you may recall, was involved in prosecuting Trump in 2020 or after the 2020 fiasco. U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell raged against Trump's grotesque behavior. He wrote, quote, no American president has ever before issued executive orders like the one at issue. In purpose and effect, this action draws from a playbook as old as Shakespeare, who penned the phrase, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. Trump's act is unconstitutional, retaliation, and viewpoint discrimination, plain and simple. And look, as a lawyer myself, it is great to see a judge champion free speech and free expression and protect lawyers from grotesque discrimination and intimidation, rather than, and I've seen some judges try to do this, try to strike down lawyers as some fascist regimes enable. And so to see this judge tell Trump that no, you don't get to bully law firms like this just because they did their job of upholding due process of law, that's huge. And remember, this is what Shakespeare's court is about, that the first thing we do is we kill all the lawyers. I know people don't like lawyers for a lot of good reasons. I don't like lawyers for a lot of reasons. But I will tell you this, it's the human rights lawyers and the civil rights lawyers who are fighting to uphold due process of law to make sure that we have the ability to be critical of our government without being arrested and being thrown into a gulag or prison or deported to another country. It's the lawyers who are doing this. And for Trump, he's being very deliberate to attack the lawyers. And if he's successful there, we're in a lot of trouble because now the people who know the law are not allowed to practice the law. And there's a chilling effect of other lawyers. And so this was a ruling that sends a message to lawyers across the country that, yeah, you actually will be protected from this fascist and from people who want to try to deny the right of lawyers to speak with the right of free speech and the protection of free speech and everything that comes with that as well. All right. Number 7, this is another big one. A federal court blocked Trump's ban on foreign students. So last week, the Trump regime issued an executive order banning Harvard University from accepting foreign students. That's nearly 7,000 people. And, before I get into the judge's order on that, I have to believe it's because Obama and the Obamas and their daughters went to Harvard and Trump didn't, and I don't think any of his kids did either. I feel like this is his personal vendetta. I feel like he is petty enough to make this his personal vendetta and to just flex what he can. So he bans foreign students. So for him, it's a trifecta, right? He gets to hurt a school that Harvard went to. He gets to ban foreigners who are mostly black and brown foreign students, and he gets to claim that he's anti-elitist. So no sooner did he issue this order, but U.S. District Judge Alison Burroughs issued a TRO, a temporary restraining order, overruling Trump's executive order. Lawyers for Harvard wrote in their lawsuit, said, quote, "With the stroke of a pen, the government has sought to erase a quarter of Harvard's student body, international students who contribute significantly to the Harvard University mission. Without its international students, Harvard is not Harvard," end quote. Now, I am hopeful that this TRO becomes a permanent ban on Trump's fascist executive order. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, said that Harvard can regain its ability to host foreign students if it produces a trove of records on foreign students within 72 hours, end quote. This is government telling a private institution, give us private information on students or else. Yeah, I mean, nothing fascist about that. And by the way, this is a woman who was also asked what habeas corpus is and did not know what habeas corpus is, which is mind-blowing to me. How can you be the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and not know what habeas corpus is? Absurd. By the way, for those wondering, habeas corpus is the right to petition the government when you've been detained. It goes back to my point earlier about due process of law. It ensures that if you are arrested, you have a right to be heard by a court. You have a right to have your case heard, and you have a right to prove your innocence and be innocent until proven guilty. But the fact that they're ignoring all this is absolute fascism. My experience at Harvard, I did a 1-year fellowship at Harvard University. I'm an immigrant. My faculty advisor at Harvard was Dr. Ali Asani. He's an immigrant. And so Trump's move to ban Harvard from accepting foreign students is just another example that it was never about merit. It was always about protecting white mediocrity. And then the latest one that I'll talk about where Trump lost in court is the U.S. Court of International Trade has banned Trump's tariffs from going into effect and calling them beyond his authority. And so it's completely undermined his entire agenda, which is fantastic. I learned yesterday that people on Wall Street are calling Trump Taco, which stands for Trump always chickens out, because he talks about a tariff and then he backs out last second. So they're calling him Taco, which I'm not opposed to because I like tacos. And if a taco can make fun of Trump, I'm okay with that as well. But look, here's the thing, and we're down to our last couple of minutes. Even before Trump took office, I called on the Democratic Party to prepare an onslaught of lawsuits against each of his executive orders, forced him to fight for every single fascist policy. And it wasn't just me. I mean, many activists, human rights lawyers made the same call because we know that this legal strategy works. Clog up the courts with legitimate cases and force Trump to have to answer them. Sadly, the Democratic Party did not do that. They didn't get the memo. Instead, we're stuck with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer writing, quote, very strongly worded letters. And so now the party should learn from this. We see this is working. We see this is effective, and he needs to learn from this. Otherwise, we're going to lose 500 billion in Medicare, 800 billion in Medicaid, and billions more. My friends, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're listening on Substack, because your support is what makes this possible. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, with another great guest. Be sure to tune in at 10 a.m. on Sunday on SiriusXM. Make sure you follow me on social media across all platforms at Qasim Rashid. My friends, continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.